chaos, confusion, and anger growing in the wake of President Trump's
Syriens ont appris la
immigration ban.
signature du décret anti-immigration.
Demonstrations against Donald Trump's immigration ban continue nationwide.
Conflicting information about who was allowed in and who wasn't.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. Many in the U.S. news media are judging Donald Trump harshly, but are they reaping what they have sown? It took a while, 15 years, but justice is finally being done in the case of a journalist murdered in Colombia. The French media baron, whose interests are at odds with his own reporters and the work that they do. And meet Meitu, the Chinese selfie-enhancing app that can be applied anywhere on anyone. Over the past 2 weeks, the American news media have been assigned a big story, a steady stream of executive orders from President Donald Trump. The bulk of the headlines were about the ban temporarily blocking travelers, including refugees, from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the U.S. The resulting protests got plenty of coverage, the tone of which is worth exploring. The mainstream news media's treatment of this story was tinged with outrage, but it came with its own baggage, because anyone paying attention to the American news media post 9/11 would find it difficult to escape the conclusion that the media themselves laid more than a little of the groundwork upon which today's Islamophobic narrative was built. Whether they did that for reasons that were ideological or simply commercial is beside the point. The war on terror narrative could not have prevailed the way it did in the U.S. without the complicity of the American news media. And it's that fear that the new White House is now capitalizing upon. Our starting point this week is New York City. It was as though the anti-Trump movement got an executive order to hit the streets. And unlike the demonstrations that came before, starting on Inauguration Day, scheduled and organized, the ones provoked by the travel ban were spontaneous, unplanned. And they provided a visual feast for the news cameras.
When the people mobilized in the thousands and started marching, that's when you saw mainstream media pick up from social media and connect, and literally reporters then went to the airports, and it became a story that didn't die. And then you saw social media erupt. They've stayed on it because the people are out there, and that's what everyone's talking about.
The media is also struggling to cover this flurry and to try to understand what each executive order is doing, who is it going to benefit, who it's going to harm.
I think it's going to be very successful.
By the time they even get a handle on one, a new one has cropped up. And it might be a deliberate strategy of keeping the media and the people on their toes and feeling unstable as a way to push through so many of these challenges to democratic norms all at once.
It's even more difficult for journalists to get the facts because enforcement agencies might receive one set of instructions from the executive branch, and then another decision might be made from the judiciary, and there's just a lot of uncertainty and conflicting information. Also, reporters can't trust anything coming out of the White House press office.
Welcome back.
Because Sean Spicer got up within the first few days of office and lied to the public and the press.
The Trump administration seems eager to make the media the story. The president dismissed CNN's work again this past week.
But I don't watch CNN, so I don't get to see as much as I don't like watching fake news.
His advisor, Kellyanne Conway, asks aloud on the airwaves when news outlets will fire reporters who were quote-unquote wrong about Donald Trump.
Who's cleaning house? Which one is going to be the first network to get rid of these people who said things that just weren't true? Talk about
And Chief of Staff Steve Bannon continues to berate the New York Times, among others.
So Steve Bannon, the man who ran Breitbart, is now telling the media to shut up and is calling us the opposition party. If you critique us in any way, shape, or form, the President of the United States is going to call you out as fake news, like he did with New York Times and CNN. If you oppose our agenda in any way, we're going to be hostile to you, and we're going to cut off access to you, and you are the, quote, opposition party.
That's one way of controlling the flow of information in our society. If you completely discredit the media and the people who are supposed to be guardians of the facts and disseminate true information, The only other source of information is you. Sean Spicer said in one of his earliest press conferences that the Trump administration was going to be a check on the media. The media is supposed to serve as the fourth estate. It's supposed to serve as a check on power. The White House checking the media, that's just fascism. That's authoritarianism, almost pure and simple.
Selling a brand of authoritarianism is much more difficult if the electorate has not been conditioned, primed, for that kind of message.
We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries.
And over the years, the U.S. news media have helped with the priming.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
From 9/11 on, starting with the false Iraq WMD story and moving through sporadic attacks in the U.S., the coverage has veered towards the sensational and too often the unquestioning. Such as the Boston Marathon bombings in 2013, when an entire city was shut down, schools closed, and a no-fly zone imposed as police and the military searched for a single 19-year-old suspect.
The basic question all Americans want to know this morning is how do we better protect ourselves?
Of all the questions the networks and news outlets were asking at the time, as they rose in the ratings and counted the clicks, why, and are the security measures warranted, were not among them.
And so all of us are guilty, not just CNN, not just MSNBC, not just Fox News, but also people on social media. And it's something I think that we, as a result of San Bernardino,
We have two books that appear to be the Quran.
as a result of the Pulse shooting,
He apparently was screaming some words in a foreign language.
as a result of what happened in the Boston bombing.
I was told by one of these sources, who was a law enforcement official, that this was a dark-skinned male.
Adds to the climate of sensationalism, hate, and hysteria.
We have to remember that the media played a role in invading Iraq. Judith Miller at the Times reported statements coming from the federal government that turned out not to be accurate later, and that led the public to believe one thing. And I think that it was very easy for the White House to drum up fear post 9/11. It was almost a go-to reaction, and the media was not immune from that fear.
So Mayor, I will start with you. You govern a majority Muslim American city. Are you afraid?
The media adopted terminology like Islamic terrorist without really thinking about the implications of that.
We have to really take a step back and see what's our role, what's our responsibility, and how can we not promote that type of sensationalism.
Consider what this media activist told the Listening Post in the aftermath of the Boston bombings, in light of the news coverage Americans were seeing at the time and where it could lead. The interview took place in April 2013, 3.5 years before the election of Donald Trump.
The after effect of the kind of alarmist and hysterical and finger-pointing coverage that we saw of the Boston bombing really softens the public up, really makes us feel frightened, makes us feel confused, and really leaves us very, very vulnerable to whatever is going to be brought forward as a solution. Anything media does that makes us unquestioningly frightened is going to feed into that problem.
How do you get into the mind or change the mindset of someone who really believes kill, kill, kill?
And it is going to make us ultimately a much more dangerous society and not a safer one.
In these dark days for the U.S. news media, there are rays of light, a few shards of hope, signs, tangible, data-backed evidence that Americans are growing more engaged and less apathetic vis-à-vis their politics and the news outlets through which the political story is told.
Many people within the U.S. are now reinvesting in the mainstream media and re-legitimizing it, like the newspapers. And New York Times, Wall Street Journal, their subscriptions have soared. And CNN seems to also be kind of rewriting its own mission in that way, to bringing back the sense that the media is the fourth estate. That is the media's job to hold power accountable and to challenge the kind of non-transparency of politics, hoping that the mainstream media is really one of the key institutions right now that can hold this administration's feet to the fire.
On the download now, our viewers on the story unfolding in the United States and the way it's been covered.
When I see the mainstream media accusing Donald Trump of lying, I say, y'all are the ones who are lying. The mainstream media, they know they're dying, and they know alternative media like Breitbart and InfoWars is on the rise, and that they are going to go out of business within probably the next decade.
Steve Bannon's recent comments to the press that they should keep their mouths shut reflects the Trump administration's tactic to humiliate reporters into silence. It's an intimidation strategy from an administration that has found success in resting many of its claims on alternative facts and sweeping generalizations. And it's a tactic that seeks to frame journalism conducted with rigor and integrity as being in direct opposition to the Trump administration. While there have been reporters who have come out to say that they will indeed not shut up.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week: that mass shooting at a mosque in Quebec City, Canada, that left 6 people dead last week, resulted in a journalistic blame game gone wrong, leading to an apology from Fox News. After the January 29th attack, police took 2 men into custody, one of whom was of Moroccan descent. However, early the next day, the authorities clarified that the Moroccan-born man was a witness and that Quebec-born Alexandre Bissonnette was the sole suspect. Despite that being made clear, Fox continued to tweet the suspect was of Moroccan origin, failing to mention Bissonnette, who other news outlets were describing as a white nationalist and a supporter of Donald Trump. The director of communications for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Kate Purchase, then sent a letter to Fox saying the tweet spread misinformation and perpetuates fear and division. She demanded Fox News update the story to reflect the suspect's true identity. Fox then apologized for its error and made the correction. Some unfinished business in Colombia over the murder of a journalist there 15 years ago has been taken care of at the border between the U.S. and Mexico. The Colombian journalist was Orlando Sierra, the deputy editor of a leading newspaper called La Patria, who was shot dead in 2002 in the provincial capital of Manizales. Sierra wrote extensively on corruption in local Colombian politics. The case went to court in 2014, and 3 men were convicted, all in absentia of the murder. One of them, Fabio Lopez Escobar, was sentenced to 28 years for his involvement and had an Interpol warrant issued for his arrest. On January 30th, Escobar was finally captured by U.S. border officials who say he was trying to enter Mexico. Another man wanted in the case, a politician named Ferney Tapasco, was arrested in 2015. He was considered the mastermind behind the murder and is now serving a 36-year sentence. A third man, Escobar's brother, Jorge Lopez, remains on the run. A Turkish journalist in exile has seen his new website, a news outlet aimed at a domestic Turkish audience, blocked by Ankara just as it was getting off the ground. Can Dündar, the former editor of Cumhuriyet, created the site based in Berlin called Özgürüz, along with another exiled journalist, Heiko Bagdat, a former columnist with the online outlet Diken. The site was built in collaboration with the investigative nonprofit Correctiv and aims to publish uncensored news about Turkey in Turkish and German. However, the site was blocked, apparently by Turkey's official Information and Communications Technologies Authority, just 2 days after its launch. Dündar fled to Germany last year, pending an appeal of his conviction for exposing state secrets in a report that Cumhuriyet published in 2014 on covert Turkish weapons exports to rebels in Syria. Bagdat was forced into exile, having written articles critical of President Tayyip Erdogan. On Twitter, Dündar said he was not surprised by the blocking of the site. The Turkish government has been cracking down on dissent ever since the failed coup in July of last year. 150 journalists are currently believed to be in jail, and hundreds more are on trial on a variety of charges, including espionage and abetting terrorism. Late last year in Paris, employees working at a 24-hour news channel went on strike. They downed tools for 31 days. The strike at e-Télé was part of a bigger conflict that pits journalists against one of the richest and most powerful businessmen in France, Vincent Bolloré. Bolloré's media and entertainment conglomerate, Vivendi, bought e-Télé's parent company, Canal+, about 3 years ago. Since then, he's replaced most of the management team, made some controversial hires, scrapped some popular programs, and left himself open to accusations of killing quality journalism, including the kind that exposes some of his own business affairs, particularly in Africa, where Bolloré makes most of his money. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now from Paris on the tension that exists between the business and journalism sides of Vincent Bolloré's French media empire.
C'est la deuxième chaîne d'information en France qui a montré, et très récemment notamment.
French journalists will have covered their fair share of strikes, but 2 months ago it was the journalists themselves who stopped working and started protesting in one of the longest journalist strikes in French history. Workers at the 24-hour news channel iTélé took to the picket line in a showdown triggered after the channel hired talk show host Jean-Marc Morandini to present a primetime show despite having been accused of multiple counts of sexual wrongdoing. The man who gave him the job was France's billionaire business tycoon Vincent Bolloré. He made his fortune from paper, not for news, but the thin variety used to make cigarettes and to publish the Bible, before going into construction and advertising. In 2013, he took control of the Vivendi Group and its affiliates, including the Canal Plus network, of which iTélé is a component. And journalists there say he wants to turn the news channel into an infotainment one that promotes the Vivendi Group's other activities.
Depuis que Vincent Bolloré a pris le contrôle.
Ever since Vincent Bolloré took control of the Vivendi Group, which also owns Canal Plus and iTélé, he totally transformed the business model of the media network. The strike was a response to the fact that Bolloré has no clue what to do with iTélé. For the last 18 months, the journalists working there have been uncertain about what the future holds.
Ce qui va se passer pour eux.
Vous avez l'actionnaire qui arrive, qui va faire sauter des têtes.
He made enormous cuts to the budgets and fired a lot of employees. Then he brought in his own men and put them at the head of various departments at Canal Plus and imposed them on newsrooms. Journalists at iTélé asked him to, at the very least, sign a code of ethics which would guarantee journalistic independence. But he refused.
Vincent Bolloré qui n'est de pas céder.
Vincent Bolloré, c'est quelqu'un qui est un formidable entrepreneur.
Vincent Bolloré is a great entrepreneur. He's been very successful in all his businesses, but he has a big problem with journalism. He doesn't understand that journalists aren't motivated by making money for the group they belong to. He had already been the owner of smaller media outlets like Direct Matin, which he used to promote his own products or censor other products he didn't like.
Déplaisait à Vincent Bolloré.
Since then, the Canal Plus network has been transformed. Bolloré took Les Guignols de l'Info, a well-known political puppet show, sidelined the writers and boasted that he'd be the one writing the scripts. He cancelled Le Zapping, a long-running media critique show because, he said, there was no point giving other channels free publicity. This year, it was announced Le Petit Journal, the irreverent satirical news show, would only be available to subscribers. It was the death knell, so they moved to another channel.
Au revoir Canal+.
Then, Bolloré turned his attention to news and current affairs. Jean-Baptiste Rivoire was the deputy editor of Spécial Investigation on Canal+. Last year, Bolloré cancelled the show after one of its reports exposed tax fraud at French bank Crédit Mutuel, one of the Bolloré Group's main financial partners. The exposé was later broadcast on the public channel France 3 instead.
Nos révélations impliquent pour la première fois une grande banque française.
Printemps 2015, on s'est intéressé à une banque qui
In 2015, we did an investigation on the Crédit Mutuel bank, exposing how the bank was guilty of tax fraud and was transferring funds overseas. Management at Canal Plus didn't want the episode to be broadcast because the head of the bank in question was a good friend of Bolloré's. So they pulled the plug on the report and told us journalists working on the program not to report on his business collaborators.
Et qui avait décidé qu'il fallait pas embêter ses partenaires.
La question qu'il faut se poser, c'est est-ce que c'est la
You have to question whether the choices and decisions made by Bolloré came from sound financial reasoning, or whether actually they were motivated by something much more personal. I think he bought Canal Plus to wield political influence in France by protecting his friends from reports on the news channel. And also, I don't think you can underestimate the African angle.
Sous-estimer la question de l'Afrique.
because the mainstay of Vincent Bolloré's business is spread across more than 40 African countries, where Bolloré Africa Logistics controls ports, transport and plantations. In the past few years, he's developed Canal Plus Afrique, a channel which has become a major force around the African continent, much more prominent than Canal Plus is in France, where Bolloré has been able to yield his influence and control his company's image. And when journalists show his business in a less than favorable light, Bolloré gets litigious. He's currently suing France 2 TV for 50 million euros over an investigative documentary program he says is defamatory. And that's just one of many lawsuits he's filed against journalists in the past few years.
Donc là, on allait tourner donc au Cameroun.
We went to Douala in North Cameroon to report on Bolloré's palm oil plantations. He hates it when we do that. We saw plantation workers working with very little protection, or none at all. Several weeks after the documentary was aired, Bolloré denied those people worked for him and said that France 2 TV had paid adults to pose as children. He accused us of lying, as if a journalist could pay an actor to play a child and to put on fake gloves with holes in them to show that the equipment was in bad condition. He took us to court, but the accusations were crazy.
Des accusations totalement délirantes.
Des transporteurs, des gestions de...
Port and railway activities have been at the heart of the Bolloré Group for the last 20 years. He has crafted himself a true empire in Africa. Bolloré does not like news because it has the potential to hinder the work his company does. Legal action is being taken against him in Africa. Legal action is also taken every time he comes into contact with a journalist regarding his business in Africa.
In purchasing the Canal Plus group, Bolloré saw the opportunity to gain political and social power through Canal Plus Afrique, a channel that has been innovative over the last few years and has become very popular in Africa. Through the channel, he can promote his company and partners.
Le chantier est pharaonique et c'est le groupe Bolloré qui le réalise.
He can give good publicity to African politicians whom he would like to see in power. This is the main reason why he purchased the Canal Plus group.
Business tycoons like to have their fingers in many pies, and investing in the media provides them with something that other holdings do not, a certain degree of influence. The flip side of that is being held to account, sometimes by journalists that work in their own organizations. We made a series of attempts to talk to management at Canal Plus and iTélé. They said they were unavailable for interview.
Many parliamentarians say they're alarmed at the degree of corporate concentration in the French media sector in general, that this is part of a wider trend that must be stopped. And they're trying to push a new law through Parliament, a piece of legislation that some call the anti-Bolloré law, but that others say is about media independence as a whole.
Bolloré, c'est un symptôme assez intéressant.
Bolloré is a symptom of a bigger problem. In the US, Jeff Bezos bought Amazon. And in France, Berger, Niel and Pigasse bought Le Monde. Patrick Drahi took over L'Express, BFM and RMC. And now Bolloré has joined them. All these millionaires from outside the media are buying them up, and they're slowly gaining control over the world's biggest media groups. This phenomenon is a real threat to independent journalism.
Finally, the pressure to look one's best online can be pretty intense, and there are apps for that. Selfie-enhancing apps. There's one called Meitu that's all the rage in China. Want to be a little taller, bigger eyes, fuller lips, fewer wrinkles? No problem. Your new look is just a tap or two away. And we figured that since global politics can be a pretty ugly business, especially these days, we'd give some familiar faces the Meitu treatment. We may have gone a little bit overboard with the sparkles, though. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.